I am very excited about today's webinar within our Sacred Self-Healing series for 2023, Adjusting to Change, because today we are actually going to dive deeper into what it actually means to master our body. And it's probably not what you're expecting. So let's do this in a structured way. And Sorrow, as I always present those topics here that we discuss within our Sacred Self-Healing community. We've gotten as far as the 6th chapter here of 2023, going through an elaborate series of 6 webinars in regard to mastering our relationships, our interactions, mastering our goals, mastering our attitude, our needs and wants. Then we took a little sidestep to the aliens discussion that is in our collective right now, and we also went back to the nature of darkness, and there's a reason for that. And as I was preparing the slides for today's webinar, I realized that we're probably in for 2 parts once more. Why is that? Because there is a larger context that we need to understand if we want to understand what's entailed in mastering our body. So if you are expecting me to talk about vitamins and supplements and what kind of exercises to do and all these kind of things, I will not do that, guys. I have done this in the last 15 years. Aspects of higher vibratory living, of higher vibratory diet, and you can look this all up in the forum. I am going to dive deeper into what our body is, how we came to be who we are, and how we evolved into this form that we are today, and what the purpose of that is. And once you understand these fundamental, at first seems fundamental for the mind, concepts of what the body is, and what you're dealing with, and once you understand the sacredness of this holy form, all right, then some of these teachings about, what kind of food and what kind of exercise and what kind of conditions, that you need, that are allowing you to evolve into your higher expression, into your healthier, into your more powerful and more mastered relationship with your body, become almost like, well, I want to say common sense. All right, so the reason why we do not understand what our body needs, for this sacred alchemy that is taking place in form of our physical 3D metabolism and our spiritual metabolism, is because we are still lacking the ability to discern what is conducive and what is not, what is life promoting and what is not. And therefore, as always here within the Sacred Self-Healing community, we will dive into that today so that we can have a little more structured discussion about what it is that our bodies need. And so we're going to start out this conversation with fundamental spiritual concepts and understanding, namely that what we're actually dealing with when we are talking about our physical body is merely the densest layer of a culmination, of different dimensional aspects of our body. So the physical 3D being the densest means that they must be other forms, other underlying templates, if you will, underneath this. And this is why we're starting this conversation today with the statement that our physical form is nothing but the expression of an inner process, of a spiritual process. So we must ask ourselves when we enter this question, where are we from? What are we? Who are we? Where are we going? How did we come to be? How did we evolve? And where are we evolving to or towards to, with the larger context of what it actually is that we are expressing here. And make no mistake, our physical form is merely an outer expression of an inner metamorphosis process. This is not just something I'm making up. This is something that can be learned. This is science, nature science, and that can be experienced. We all experience that there must be something in us, that is not dependent, not tied to this physical form. We can all experience this, and that is what we call the spiritual impulse. We have some kind of impulse in us that informs us that there is something beyond the physical. And this is basically the biggest sort of controversy in our day and age, because over the centuries, over the millennia, humans have evolved into a more and more material understanding of the human body. And so if you go back a few thousand years, then the understanding of what a human is and what the human body is was completely different than it was today. And we started this discussion when we talked about aliens and what aliens are, and whether or not they are actually extraterrestrial, if they're coming from different planets, or if they are transdimensional beings that exist simultaneously in the same space that we are existing here on Earth, but are perhaps devolved human forms. So we are going to discuss that in our continued discussions about aliens. So we're not really going to dive deeper into this. We are instead going to investigate what this larger template, this evolving, this growing, this striving into our higher expression, what that is all about. And I don't need to tell you this here within the Sacred Self-Healing community, because you must have already either experienced or learned and experienced that there is a duality in you, that you have this dense physical form on one hand, but that you also have this soul or spirit being in you. And the fact that we name this sacred self-healing is already hinting at the mystery of this relationship between our soul and our physical 3D reality, and with it, our bodies. So we are essentially soul beings, spiritual beings that are having a physical experiences. We are souls with a body, and not bodies with a soul. So this is kind of like this force here in our day and age that is almost sort of interfering here, hindering us from fully understanding who we are, where we're from, and where we're going. And this first needs to be discerned. If we cannot discern whether our inner guidance, our inner sentiments, our inner thoughts, and ultimately our choices are coming from our higher self, yeah, from this higher being in us, or from our ego, yeah, this typical question that many of us have, is this guidance coming from my true self or my ego? If we are not able to discern this yet, we also cannot discern, yeah, whether what it is that we are following or what it is that we are allowing to manifest as a belief, as a thought or word in us, whether that is actually coming from a higher or a lower state, or a higher being or a lower being, or, if you will, from the forces of light or the forces of dark. We cannot. So for as long as we cannot discern that, for as long as we do not know, yeah, whether something is good for us or not, whether something will help us evolve and grow, or whether it's going to create misery for us, okay, we are still in the process of this discernment. Yeah, and discernment is a word that you hear me say over and over again, because it is something that we have, just in the course of the entirety of the human consciousness development, most recent history, yeah, that we have only required in the most recent history of the last, 2 millennia, and that is the ability to actually think those concepts through and feel into them, yeah, with our unified heart mind for ourselves. So we are basically, yeah, spiritual teenagers now that are trying to figure out what is, leading us to higher levels, or greater levels of, mastery in our life, greater levels of truth, greater levels of freedom, and greater levels of love in our life, because those are the components of light, yeah, that are basically showing us the way. They're the three big sort of, I want to say, trajectories in our map here that we carry in us. But one of the things that people often underestimate, and it's one of those controversies that you hear me talk about a lot in regard to the modern phenomena of spirituality, is the duality of evolution. I don't know if you can follow me here with the analogy of spiritual teenagehood, but if you just have a little bit of psychological sort of common knowledge, you'll understand that obviously as a human, when we are born, yeah, when we're an infant, when we're a baby, yet we don't have all these abilities that the mature version of us will have. We have to slowly acquire them throughout the process of individuation. So as very young infant, yeah, like the first 6 months, first 16, 18 months of our life, we are very much dependent on, everything that comes from the outside. We are completely externalized, if you will, because we have no power. We can barely move. Yeah, this doesn't happen until, a little bit over a year. We cannot talk. We cannot express our needs and our wants yet. Yeah, we cannot feed ourselves. We cannot dress ourselves. We cannot shelter ourselves. So these first, 18 months to 2 years are basically extremely dependent. And when we then move into our toddlerhood, yeah, the terrible twos, as they call them, we're starting to develop something like an ego, yeah, something like, oh, I am me and you are you. So up until that age, the child actually regards itself as a part, literally as a part of the physical, of the mother or the main caretaker. So that's something that you may not know, but we all, I mean, we may not have the memory of that time, but we can all observe this, the helplessness and the powerlessness of an infant and even a toddler, even though the toddler, assumes, of course, to be the center of the world, which we all know is not the case. Then when we look into the development that comes, in our early, that primary stage, starting with the age of 5, where we have developed a more clear brain structure. We have developed, a more individuated understanding of the environment that we're in, and about at that age, also with the change of teeth, so 7 years old is when the child then begins to actually become able to understand concepts. So abstract thinking sets in at that time. Until then, the understanding of concepts such as why the earth rises every morning, or that there's something like life and death and so forth, cannot be grasped by a child. It simply hasn't developed the tools yet. The tools are already seated in the human, the physical form, so the brain and the the 5 senses and the ability to process things that are all sort of seeded into us via our genetics, via our instincts and our conditioning. And then with increasing level of socialization, we begin to increasingly refine our ego, our I, and we all know that whatever we perceive as our I as a child or as a teenager even is still relatively sort of lowercase compared to the understanding of I that you have today. But at each of these stages of development, it is not known to us what we don't know. And it helps to understand your development of consciousness and the evolution of your own being, if you look at it through the lens of phylogenesis, of this process that every human goes through in the process of growing up. And this is why I am using, the word spiritual teenagehood as an analogy, because if we look at the bigger picture and we understand that, behind every human body, behind the individuated human form that we experience ourselves as, is a spirit being, is a spiritual being, that already has the understanding, that already has the knowing, that already has the concept, the higher concept in it, without the lower I, if you will, knowing about it. Okay, so let's just all start this conversation with, looking at these two things, looking at ourselves as spirit beings that are having a physical experience, a soul with a body. And let's look at us as the body, as a metamorphosis, a form, okay, that evolves throughout its own existence from this perceived, cell or conceived cell biologically, physiologically, into a grown-up human with this extremely elaborate and highly evolved, being that we call physical body. Yeah, so the physical being that we're looking at. These two concepts need to be understood. So Julianne, you're posing a question here. You say vehicle question mark. Can you elaborate on this for us? I want you guys to ask questions, by the way, so please do that. Please speak into the microphone. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just looking and observing the body as being like a vehicle that we are in. That
Okay. Okay.
when you were just
And the question is?
Yeah, that our body is the vehicle that that our soul inhabits.
Okay, what's the question? Or where do you not know? Where's the question?
I'm
Simply,
sorry,
is
it was
that
just
so?
when you were explaining before, I thought maybe vehicle is a word for the body.
Okay.
Is vehicle a word for the body? Maybe that's a
Okay.
question.
You say, and then you said you like seeing it this way. So there's, it's definitely something that helps to imagine, the fact that there is more than just a body. Yeah. So when we talk about a vehicle, yeah, we're talking about a tool, really. But if we talk about a vehicle and if we reduce it to that, then we cannot leave out of sight that a vehicle is supposed to bring us from somewhere to somewhere. Okay, so stay with me, Julianne. This is a very important question. A lot of people call it vehicle, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I would like to go deeper with this. So if the body is a vehicle, what is its purpose then?
Oh, and I can see it. It's not just like as in a physical vehicle. It's actually like it's receiving. It's like an antenna that's receiving information, and it can transform. It can shift. So if saying a vehicle like as it's just a physical thing, that it's nothing, because our cells, we can communicate with our cells of our body. So, but I think for me, the physical body is the most dense form of energy. So in saying vehicle, I'm not meaning like as in a car, which is, we can't.
This is something we got to be careful though with, because we materialize it in that way. Yeah. And if we materialize it in this, we pull it into the profane, we say, oh, it's just a vehicle. All right. So
exactly.
there is nothing wrong with seeing it as a vehicle if one understands that a vehicle is, part of a longer process, okay, a way, from here to there, which is, basically what evolution implies. Evolution implies that that there is a way from a lower into a higher, unspecified for now, but existence or expression. Yeah, so we could of course say that the caterpillar is a vehicle for the butterfly, but we're not fully doing the caterpillar justice with that, are we now? Because the caterpillar carries the seeds for the butterfly in it. So it evolves with it. In fact, the caterpillar is the butterfly, just an infant version of it, a baby version of a butterfly. Our body, our physical body, may just as well be the baby version of something higher. Now, this might be a new process, thought process for you, because in our day and age, we tend to materialize things, and especially the physical body that is, from a legal standpoint, defined as, the brain function, yeah, electrical impulses going through the brain. It can't be more materialistic, yeah, and even from an allopathic and medical point of view, all right, the human body is actually treated like a vehicle, yeah, like a thing that you can put spare parts into and you can exchange it. And there's a lot of questions that are now arising as we are entering the day and age of transhumanism, where these boundaries aren't so clear anymore. What happens if you alter the DNA? What happens if you exchange everything? Is that still the same self, the same I? Think about it for a moment. At what point would you not be you anymore? When your brain gets exchanged, when your heart gets exchanged, when your, I don't know, or your skin gets exchanged? That's a question for you guys. What makes you
Hello,
you?
Yona, or hi everybody. It's Janet.
Hi, Janet.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, when you are talking about this way, it seems easy to see the body as like such a solid ending. Like it's the end. Like there's nothing beyond our body. I don't know how to say it. Except that within your talking and what I've learned as well is that, and you even just said it in the introduction, that our bodies are a manifestation of our spirit, or soul, or our and our incarnation. So it seems like with all these adjustments in science and technology, if one starts working on this side of the evolution of our spirit really deeply on our body, that if we lose touch with our spirit and our soul, then it kind of starts not to make us us. Like it can really impact us, just like some brainwashing or something could. That's how I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it the other way around. Like we're in a body here only because it's manifested and it's actually solid, but it's also not solid at the same time.
Yes,
Does that?
the not solid part would be the spirit being in us, or our soul, right? That would be the one that is actually the main actress or the main actor, right? And the physical then just becomes a costume or like a
Yeah,
suit.
sort of like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like I start to think, it starts to come to me like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did
Yeah.
your body come first and then your soul hop in? But
Yeah.
I think it's really the other way around.
So wonderful. This is a wonderful thought process, Janet, and you thought that all yourself, which is great. That's what an insight is. The insight is that you are
Thank
sort
you.
of following the breadcrumbs and you come into a conclusion on your own. You may have read that somewhere, you may have heard that somewhere, you may have heard other people say it, but it's now a whole different dimension of understanding. Yeah. That's why self-reflective questions are a big part of, understanding ourselves, and with it also, of course, the process of initiation, the process of evolving and healing. Now we have to understand ourselves. If you want to know how to heal something, you got to understand what needs to be healed first. So you need to ask these kind of questions. Now, if I'm seeing the physical as the main actress, okay, and there is something wrong there, and I'm fixing what is wrong with it, let's say, let's take a typical issue such as a knee problem, okay, or some organ problems. and you exchange the organ or you exchange the knee. You may have, you know, just like with a car, you know, renewed that part, but have you actually addressed the cause of the problem? I'm not here to discuss, you know, those fundamental controversies in medicine, you know, between, you know, the current, you know, the current allopathic and naturopathic approach, but it's important for us to feel and think this through ourselves. Okay, for as long as we are seeing our physical as, well, what I call the main actor, yeah, the one and only thing that matters, we may not really become able to evolve it. Because if we don't know what the purpose of this body is, yeah, even if we call it, say, a vehicle, metaphorically, bringing us from here to there. So if we don't know the here and there, okay, how can we decide? How can we choose what we need for it, what it needs? Not to mention, obviously, the greater goal, you know, of what this might all be linked to, overall evolution. So does the baby need to know that one day is going to be a grown-up? Simple question. Does the baby need to know what it's going to look like when it's a grown-up? What it's going to be like?
Well, if you're talking to the baby's living in its just own consciousness. So
Yeah.
that consciousness is just inhabiting a smaller evolutionary physical form that's going to keep growing, but it's still like the same
Yeah, it doesn't
person,
need to know
right?
that, right? It just keeps growing.
Oh,
It just keeps
yeah,
growing. It will grow.
right.
You know, it will arrive there someday. You know?
He's like,
To the
stop!
surprise of
I
some
don't have any
humans,
more shoes.
to the
They don't
surprise of
stop.
some humans, they actually arrive in adulthood one day. You know, now whether their psyche wants that or allows that, that's a
Right.
different question. But
Right.
the baby doesn't need to know what it's going to look like. It doesn't need to know the process of evolving. It doesn't need to know any of this because it's going to happen spontaneously. It's going to happen without the involvement of the baby. Yeah. The baby's will is not involved in that. There is a higher will that is doing that. Okay. So that's one thing we need to become clear about. Yeah? So assuming that there is a higher self in you that is working through you with your body, okay, you don't need to know where you're going. You just need to know that there is basically two exits here. Okay. And one will lead you into your higher self, and the other one will lead you to your lower self. Why am I suddenly bringing in the duality? Because, see, this is the part that we are mostly unaware of, that the mere fact that we can observe our own I, our own self, is actually already an expression of the higher self. It already is. Which means that the moment you recognize yourself as yourself, yeah, which is something that, you know, profoundly distinguishes us from animals and all other beings, we are now also experiencing something that we could call choice. Choice. Yeah, we can choose this way or that way. We can choose to eat the cookies, or we can choose to eat our veggies. We can choose to brush our teeth, or choose to not brush our teeth. I always tell the kids, hey, you just got your brand new grown-up teeth. They're going to have to last another 80 years. and you're not going to have any spares. So make good choices. Yeah. So the ability to feel what a good choice is and what is not, that is what we call discernment. But discernment is basically the power that comes with choice. Yeah, so choice is neutral. Yeah, and discernment is the tool. So the duality of evolution is that with more power, with higher levels of mastery, yeah, so the older the child becomes, the more choices it has, the more responsibility it assumes, until the moment when it's a grown-up, when it's assumed full self-responsibility. Self-responsibility is the goal. Let's discuss this for a moment. Why is self-responsibility the goal? What's so cool about self-responsibility? For many, self-responsibility is a bad word. It's a negative word. Well, let's discuss this. How do you feel about the word? Just the word, self-responsibility. What does it trigger in you? What does it make you feel? Does it feel like a burden? Like a heavy weight? Or does it remind you or bring back the remembrance that you have the freedom to choose? How do you see? What are your beliefs about self-responsibility? Did you want to say something, Janet? I got your mic off here.
Oh,
Okay. Any thoughts, anybody?
my phone, like I moved it and it did some things. I don't know what's going on right now, but I know what comes to mind for me very easily is this self-responsibility. When I would hear it, I have a memory of hearing it and just it having no meaning to me. It literally was like, oh, okay, self-responsible, sure. And there was no like booklet or anything to look it up and what you're supposed to do. So from that aspect, and then, responsibility came in,
Yeah, all we
and I
hear is
can,
the responsibility, right? We
yeah, you're
hear,
like, okay,
you omit
sure,
the
yeah,
self.
and yeah, right. So, I know it still is a mystery to me. It's still like, oh, but now it's a little bit more interesting, and I do have less of a kind of a kickback to it, because I think there are definitely times where you'd hear self-responsibility and have like some sort of mumblings or complainings or negative responses to the idea, because it seems so heavy. And I can see now too, when you talk about teenage evolutionary stage, how self-responsibility can be shunned because there's such a mystery to it, and it seems like something to rebel against, like something telling you what to do. But I think there's a glimmer in me right now where I can see the self-responsibility is actually following that which is lighter and less heavy and less difficult, and less suffering with it. So I feel personally more at ease with it after so many life experiences of gaining wisdom too. I think that helps.
Yeah, so what I hear you say, Janet, is that there is an evolution in you that has taken place. Yeah, a transmutation of the word responsibility. Okay, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's something that we hear when we hear self-responsibility at first in an immature state, yeah, at a young age, let's say maybe let's take my 9-year-old. Okay, when I say the word "you are self-responsible," or he hears that it's his fault. Okay, that's literally what he hears. So the burden and the heaviness that comes with the word responsible or responsibility has to do with, you know, our understanding of guilt and blame and judgment. Yeah, we use, especially in the English language, the word responsible fundamentally in a context of blaming. Yeah, whose responsibility is this? Who's responsible for this and this and this and this? Right? That's how this word has been transfigured into its negative connotation only.
Yeah,
Which,
especially too, like with religions too, it makes it so
yeah,
exactly
they
what
play
you're
a big
saying. I
role.
agree.
Yeah, they play a big role in this. Yeah, so everything around the word sin and you know, these concepts that we have in our heads, okay, feels heavy. Now, I use the word responsibility always with the prefix of self, just as I do this with healing, just as I do this with mastery, or any of these proposed concepts that I teach. Yeah, everything is self. Yeah, including self-absolution, including forgiveness, self-forgiveness. Everything is self. Self-love. Why? Because that is already seeded into us in form of, well, I don't want to say it as like, you know, like something external, but in form of this higher self that lives within. And our physical form is merely, you know, the part here that expresses that. Okay. And why is it that we have to have that physical form, that physical expression? This is a question that you need to ask with everything. And with everything in life, be it, why do I have to go through physical pain? Why do I have to go through a heartache? Why is this so hard? Why do I have so much struggle? Why is my mind torturing me? With everything, you need to ask, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of having this physical experience as a higher self that is expressing itself through us is choosing the self, is evolving into an individuated soul self. An individuated sovereign soul self is a self now that has basically mastered the training program called duality, that has mastered all the tests and tribulations, if you will, of choice, that is responsible and wise enough to go into the next level of evolution. In the United States, a teenager needs to be 16 years old to obtain a driver's license, but can already start learning to drive the car at the age of 15 in the presence of an adult. Why? Because at the age of 15, a teenager does not yet have enough self-responsibility. As a matter of fact, not even as an 18-year-old, but until the child is then full grown up with the age of 21, their parents are still legally responsible for any potential harm or any potential damage. You see? So adulthood, well, even in our 3D reality, means that you are self responsible, that you have the freedom to choose, but also the responsibility to live with the consequences of your choices. Okay, so now looking at, the definition here of the duality of evolution with power and mastery, adulthood, physical or spiritual or otherwise, comes responsibility. There is a very intricate process, that we all have to go through. Animals do too, by the way, except for their end goal is not self-responsibility, because they are not on the same evolutionary path as we are. They have a group soul. So for them, the goal is not to individuate their soul. For them, the goal is to just become the highest and best expression of what this group soul represents. But for us as humans, which makes us so unique and our bodies so miraculous, if you think about it, we have a lot of power that we need to learn how to yield. And that is, happening in these first 21 years, just until we gain physical maturity. A physical, the pinnacle of our physical development, that at least from this most dense perspective of the body, we are capable of doing things. There are certain things that happen before that already, sexual maturity, for example, and some other aspects, that we've all learned about when we looked at all the different density levels. So there's an emotional maturity, there's an intellectual maturity, there's also a spiritual maturity, and then eventually also an energetic maturity that a human has to gain in the course of their lifetimes. But when it comes to the physical, all right, that reaches its highest level, at around the age of 21. There are then, maturing processes that allow for, say, more endurance, or, other kinds of further evolutions within that, overall evolution of the human body. But if you think about it, mainly the main evolutionary process that we enter at in our early 20s are those of socialization and emotional, psychological processes, maturing processes. And then, when we are at our sort of end 20s cycle, then we enter, into something like an intellectual pinnacle, where it's important for us, to find things that go beyond just the material and the relationships and all that. So we are beginning to ask all these spiritual questions, and then we begin, this more sort of spiritual maturing, which of course also affects the body, the mind, and the emotions. And then at some point, if we enter into this consciously and we recognize that, there are some things beyond just, surviving and paying bills and getting degrees and, some kind of material goals in life, that there are other goals as well. We're entering a whole different dimension of being. So in the course of a human life, a physical human life, we go through several cycles, of each of our bodies, and their maturation process. And that's where, it's also important to put age into consideration when we're starting to discuss, manifestations in the body, manifestations around relationships, and manifestations around, spiritual wisdom, because one of these typical examples that you can all follow is the discussion about what it's like to have children. So somebody who does not have or have not had children can enter the discussion about what it's like to raise children or have children from an intellectual standpoint quite well. I mean, you have tons of authors out there, or PhDs, yeah, about that have written about parenting and how to raise children that don't actually have children. Okay, you have lots of teachers out there who don't have children on their own. But the moment they have children, and this is very beautiful to watch, a lot of their views, a lot of their perspectives, and with it also their perception changes. So there are some things, this is just one example, yeah, not to say that you have to have children in order to enter certain maturity processes, but there are certain things that you simply will never know if you have not experienced them, and that being one of them. Yeah, so there are different components of this growth or growing process that come into play. It is not enough to just read up and know everything about evolution, or even the human anatomy and the evolution of the human body. It's not enough. It is not enough to be an expert in cellular biology or uh, anatomy, or orthopedic medicine or anything like that to explain what the purpose of this physical body is, and what is where it's going to really bring an individuated soul self. That cannot be explained through material or mechanical or materialized paradigms. That can only be felt, that can only be explored from within the inner processes. So when you talk to someone who's 13, yeah, at the beginning of their teenagehood, all right, and you ask them about how they feel about their parents and what they want to become when they're grown up, and where they see themselves in the future, you'll probably get something like either like the rebellious view that you just mentioned, Janet, yeah, anything but what my parents do, or you will get the conformist, the other extreme, where the teenager will say something along those lines of copying or imitating, what their parents or whatever, whomever the role models are, have lived for them. Yeah, so it's still pretty externalized because it's really relative, yeah, to whatever the powers are that this teenager sees themselves dependent to. Yeah, it's still relative to that. And so it comes that it takes a little bit of life experience for us to recognize that all these processes, with like, oh yeah, and because of my mom and because of my dad and my childhood and blah, 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 that those are things that we do have to go through. The awareness making of some of these things that contributed to the framework within we operate our life with, but that at some point that it all needs to be transcended. It needs to be transmuted if we want to arrive in an individuated state, yeah, where we want to see ourselves as the masters of our own life, and stand in that full power of self-responsibility, yeah, and really manifest what it is that we desire, what it is that we need, and what it is that we consciously choose to express here, then we can see that that is actually no longer of importance. Yeah? In other words, was a slightly long-winded arc here into realizing that it is important to understand where we are from. It is important to recognize and acknowledge the things that have shaped us, in all these different levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, socially, and spiritually. But because we have an I, because we have the ability to choose, we also now need to work with that. We need to mature these processes that lead us to the higher expression. Now, coming back to some of the initial discussions that we had in the other workshops this year. Yeah, so what is the consequence, for example, of not maturing? Let's do this together here. Let's go through 2 or 3 scenarios of when somebody, a human, gets stuck in certain evolutionary or developmental stages. Let's just do this here together. Now let's take 3 different age groups. Let's take the age group getting stuck in the age group before 5 years old, before conceptual and abstract thinking is possible. Yeah, the terrible 2s or 3s, if you will. Then let's discuss the example of a human that gets stuck in its 14-year-old teenager. And then let's discuss a human who gets stuck in their sort of early 20s. I am invincible. I can do whatever I want to state without the necessary life experience and wisdom to yield this. Right. So let's do this here real quick. And Andrea, I saw your comment here. Yes, and there's no judgment in when I said that some people don't have the experience yet, because some aspects and processes in our life, they don't happen at the same time for individuals. So, like having children, for example, for some that happens at a very early age, and then you can discuss what the pros and cons of that are. And for some of us, it happens at a later stage, and some of us choose to not have any children. And either of these choices, bring a certain life's wisdom. Yeah, one is not better or worse than the other. It's just different. Okay, so somebody who's never been married, somebody who's never had a dog, somebody who's never had their own home, somebody who's never traveled into a different country, somebody who's never learned how to swim, yeah, somebody who's never learned to cook, somebody who's never connected with nature. You can name any of these things, okay, is not a bad person or anything like that, or a lower developed species. It's just something that this person has not yet explored. And as it hasn't explored it yet, it can also not claim mastership over it yet, obviously. So if I have never asked myself questions about spirituality and thought and felt them and experienced them through myself, maybe just read up on them, or consumed other people's teachings, or read everything about religions or ancient spiritual teachings, but has never actually entered the spiritual individuation process, him or herself. Well, then it's just no different from someone who's read a lot of books about having children but never had children. Yeah, so that's just like a temporal thing, because it doesn't mean that this person will never have children. It just means that this person is at a certain stage or at a certain point, yeah, of development. That simply is. And that person can change that at any time. So that's the power of choice. But let's discuss these three examples here real quick. So what happens, and we can look at this from all these different density levels. What happens to a person? What do you think when they get stuck? Yeah, get stuck, whatever that means. We can discuss that in a low developmental stage. Yeah, so we're using the human development as an example. What happens when someone gets stuck at the age of, like, say, 3 or 4? Okay, what happens to their physical? How do you think this will express in their physical? How do you think that will express in their emotional? How do you think that will express in their intellectual and in their ability to self-master and self-responsibly make good choices? Who wants to share? What do you think happens when a person gets stuck or chooses to stay? We should probably say that as well. At the stage of, let's say, a 3-year-old. But physically matures into the adult. So does anybody know any grown-ups in their lives where maybe, as a joke or whatever, you have felt something like that, or made a remark that, this person, this or that person, feels like they're like a child stuck in a grown-up body or something like that. Anybody knows anyone?
I get waves of knowing people who have not fully stayed in 3 or 4 years old, but often default to that kind of behavior in certain
Okay.
situations. Let's say not all the time, but in certain situations, they might suddenly be acting like a 3 or 4 year old.
Okay. All right. Fair
You know,
enough.
and I
Mm-hmm.
also observe, it's funny because this thought has come to me a couple times about certain cultures or certain um, nations where I guess people are to I want to consolidate this to essentially say that they were never really in their society able to have a maturity and an intellectual maturity. It's all kind of a primitive, not primitive, but kind of survival living to start with.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people haven't really emotionally been able to learn other ways to cope with situations where
Yeah, can you make an
you like,
example? You're talking about certain families or certain societies, or did you mean
yeah,
certain
I mean, I
countries?
have to say I'm in Mexico and sometimes I'm like,
Mhm.
I think some people here just still are reacting to life like a 3 or 4 year old, like they
Mhm.
or following rules like they learned when they were first put into kindergarten and march with the
Yeah.
flag or something like that. So, and it's a little bit even broader than,
Mhm.
say that the person I know from the United States who still might default to emotional level of a 3 or 4 year old. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
And then,
we're talking about the total here, the total of a human, right? We're talking about, not necessarily causation, okay, like why. We can, I think, establish here, since the Sacred Self-Healing program is all about those aspects, yeah, that there are certain things in our life that can lead to us gravitating more toward these lower developmental stages within ourselves. Or we can also conclude that outer conditions Yeah, the environment, yeah, let's say the country, the society, the tribe, the nation, or the group, yeah, that a person finds themselves in or is surrounded by, yeah, that contributes to, you know, or either, you know, contributes to a sort of a still stand, yeah, or inspires to grow. Yeah, this is the fundamental nature versus nurture kind of view, you know, that obviously we all have certain potential seated in, and you know, a certain fitness, you know, to mature and you know, grow into that highest potential. But we are also dependent on our environment, that what is presented to us as role models, what is presented to us as you know, quote unquote, the way. So these are all things that we summarize as karmic aspects. Yeah, like which kind of society, which kind of cultural, ethnic group, tribe, nation, you know, time in history, a soul gets born into, all right, is fundamentally something that is carefully curated and chosen by the soul self itself in order to ensure that they more or less have the desired evolutionary experience that they need. Yeah, so you know, obviously we will all try to be as neutral as we can, so there's no judgment in that, but there are some groups that actually do calibrate this. They calibrate the general conscious level of countries, of, you know, foods, of movies, of, you know, anything that you can expose yourself to. And we can say today that yes, there are some places in this world and some societies and some religions and some groups and tribes and blah blah blah, yeah, in which the overall consciousness level is lower than in other groups. Does that kind of fit into what you were remarking, Janet? Huh?
Yeah, it does, and I
I'm
can see where
confirming it.
maybe, yeah, and that your question was you're looking to get something more specific.
Yes, you were
Yeah.
going into causation. Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if the environment, and this could be anything, a country, a family, you know, like we know that circumstances. Yeah, we know all the things about trauma and so forth. If we have adverse childhood experiences, blah blah, blah, that can all cause, you know, a person to get stuck in a certain developmental state or to revert to it when there's some pressure. Okay, so we're not talking about causation. We're not talking about what causes it. We're talking about the outer expression. How would someone who gets stuck in this developmental stage here, anywhere from 0 to 5, okay, how would that express on the outside in the physical? Not just in the physical body, also in their physical 3D reality. How does that affect a person's view on life, a person's understanding of, you know, something like a goal in life, something
Well, it
like,
would be more self-centered, wouldn't it? It would be an adult who would walk around and say, I don't like that and I want that and you didn't do this. That
yeah,
was very
yeah,
just stuck on how and what they wanted, and
yeah.
not really understanding, oh, my car's not working, I want to work, and kick the wheel or something like that, that no tools to come to a
Everything
solution.
that 0 to 5-year-olds do, acting out, mostly acting out. Yeah, self-centered, egocentric
Hmm.
view, but also also a powerless view on life, because they would feel that life more or less just happens to them. Now, just like a 5-year-old, they will wonder why this happens to them, because they do not understand that they have to put gas into a car so that the cars can drive. I mean, that's like just a simple example of that. Yeah. They'd be mad at the car for not driving. And we're not talking about causation here. We're just talking about what that does to a human being when certain developmental stages aren't fully gone through, when they are not completed. So a person that gets stuck in their childhood, yeah, and reverts to behaviors in their childhood before the age of 5, 6, when they understand, oh, you got to put gas in the car so that the engine can run, okay, will get stuck in first, second, third chakra issues and the physical expressions thereof. And when I say physical expressions, I'm not just talking the physical body. Yeah, you can see it's the lower half of the body. Yeah, issues with the knees, with the hips, with the digestive system, the lower back. Those are all lower chakra issues. Okay. And they fundamentally signal back to us that there is something there, okay, that is not in harmony, that is not completed. When something is completed, it harmonizes. When something is disrupted, it cannot harmonize. It will fracture. It will get disrupted. It will get fragmented. And the more fragmented something becomes, the more vulnerable, susceptible it becomes to separation. It will, and the body actually does that. Yeah, some of you are doctors or naturopathic doctors, I hear. Yeah, the body will actually begin to reject that which separates itself. Why? Because it's not conducive to the overall evolution, to the higher form. All right, so we all have the higher form seeded into us. Yeah, and this includes all these developmental stages that you see here on the screen that we have to go through. And if we don't, then there are some things that are left behind. We often experience those as trauma or as, wounds, yeah, as fragmented soul aspects that need to heal so that we can grow into this higher, yeah, preconceived version of ourselves. So let's do 2 more examples. What do you think happens with someone who gets stuck here in their teenage years? No, maybe here between 12 and 13. Yeah. Any of these. How would this person present in life? How would they see life? How would they act in life? And what could possible problems or manifestations, the possible problems and manifestations be that this person then experiences in the course of their life? What do you guys think? Someone who gets stuck in their teenagehood, where things such as relationships, yeah, or social standing or esteem or, place in the world and with others, our inner and outer connections form our relationship with our true self, and also obviously the aspects of love and self-love and the expression thereof. What happens to a person when they get stuck there for whatever reason, be it the environment or trauma or karma? What is this person going to have to heal in the course of their physical life so that they can harmonize. You
I'll
see,
play
it's
the game
wonderful.
again. This is a fun game.
It is, and I'm very disappointed that, I mean, Janet, don't get me wrong, I'm super grateful that you're coming on here, but I'm very disappointed that nobody else feels inspired.
I like game show. I'm going to push the button.
Yes, so press the button.
Describe the teenager.
It's called self-selection.
Well, I figured this would be somebody closing themselves off, perhaps being very hesitant to being in, you know, a relationship with anybody. Still quite self-centered, maybe self-righteous in some ways, like still feeling like they know everything, and a hard time, not quite developed in listening in a, I guess, a compassion or empathetic way with others. And I mean, the upside might be, increased creativity, but maybe a disconnect from reality a lot.
Yeah, it could also be the other extreme, so you described the one extreme, which is the disconnect. Yeah, the hostility or the withholding, the protecting oneself, not trusting anybody, not really entering into the connection out of fear, for example, yeah, out of lack of experience, really. And the other extreme can be that too open and too naive kind of encounter with the world and the relationships around, yeah, without any proper boundaries. Yeah.
And then too, this neediness of being accepted, this neediness of being in a
Yes.
group, perhaps that kind of clicking, that click sort of
Absolutely.
thing.
The whole
Yeah.
validation aspect is linked to here. Yeah, it's linked to this area. Yeah. So this is the third, the fourth and the fifth. Yeah. And it's still, what's the life view that is predominant here when someone gets stuck in that sort of not really being able to understand themselves and finding a place for themselves within the world and others.
Well, this would also then be does it hit, if we're looking at the body by age and development, then we're getting into the heart further. And if they don't feel, I guess they still might be running on what external love they received growing up.
Yeah.
And if that fuels them enough and they haven't developed a connection with their heart.
So they cannot really discern between those different kinds of love, and they're basically here. So they still see the world, from an externalized point of view, perhaps very intellectual. This is a very common thing that you see with grown-ups, that when they cannot master their emotions and, like their feelings too with others and the relationships, they start to intellectualize it. Yeah, in a way, it's a form of materializing it. Yeah, and they're still seeing it as, done to them. Their things are done to them. They're still seeing them as, as sort of an object. Yeah, that things are, happening to. It isn't really until a person realizes, okay, there is, an ability in me, there's a skill in me, yeah, where I can learn to discern this, and that is, one of the longest processes in our evolution of self, if you will, the individual evolution that we go through as humans. Yeah, is the discernment of truth. Is, does he love me? Does he not? Is this a good job for me or not? Is this a good choice for me or not? Yeah, so I mean, basically, if I were to ask you now, raise your hand if you find yourself still in that place of learning how to discern truth. You should all raise your hand, okay? Because fundamentally, that's something that we continue having to do, even if we already understand these fundamental concepts of self-responsibility, self-mastery, and self-healing. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. We will discuss that in the second part. We are now, just going through examples that are a little static here, yeah, because obviously just because you're working on, learning how to discern truth doesn't mean that you got stuck at the age of 13, okay? It just means that whatever struggle or misery you're encountering in that area in your life is linked to that developmental stage. Let me repeat that. Any issue, any disharmony, any struggle, any misery that you are encountering in these areas described here, yeah, here, connection, relationships, true self relationships, love, self-love expression, and ultimately truth, are linked to this developmental stage, that age, when you with that age. So if there are aspects of it, and it's of course highly complex, that you have not completed yet, then you are missing those tools. You are missing those abilities to deal with the higher levels of that, let's say, when you are in your more mature ages. And what happens to you in those mature ages where you should have gathered those kind of tools and abilities, but you haven't, you will experience the physical, the densest manifestations of that, because these things have to complete. And if they don't complete, in other words, if they don't harmonize, they will begin to separate, to fragment off and become, seen from an energetic point of view, what we call attachments, what we call, density fields that make you sick. That make you sick in those areas of your body, mind you, because your physical metabolism and your energetic metabolism is linked. So now let's discuss one more time. What happens with someone who gets stuck in their early 20s without any further development in the areas of discerning truth, in the area of self-expression, self-actualization, and communicating oneself clearly? What happens to a person if they do not complete this process here? Yeah. How will they present? How will they feel as, like, say, as a 60-year-old?
Ding ding. Would they, like, first you'd go from like this teenager, maybe still dressing and doing drugs and hurting their body, but then in
But let's say they have
20,
done this all their life. Let's say they
yeah,
have done this all their life, but they're now, they missed out
another
on this.
20.
Yeah, they missed out on this year.
But they're
Okay, so
60 and they're presenting like they were in the early 20s. They hadn't really taken care of what they needed to then.
yeah,
It
exactly. And well, how would
would
you
it be
fix
like
that?
this kind of facade, fake kind of person really at that point? Like
It's more the teenage.
playing
That's more when someone gets stuck here,
still?
where they're presenting something who they're not. Yes, the 20-year-olds are desperately seeking for something, but if they're unsuccessful in that process, if they don't complete that, what will then happen is that they still don't know it when they're 60. They still don't know what they need, what they want, whom they want to be, how they want to express themselves.
I mean, are
They
they the
lose.
people who are kind of like consumers and get stuck in the material world and
I'm not
getting.
judging. Yeah, I'm not judging. That can happen. That can be part
Mm.
of that presentation, that you get stuck in the material world, but people can just as well get stuck in the spiritual world. Yeah, the you know, getting stuck in the material or in the spiritual, those both extremes are you know, ways for us to cope with these incomplete or unhealed aspects of ourselves. Okay, first we have to investigate how that even presents, what the symptom is when someone has not completed that, so that we understand ourselves better. If I don't know what I need, what I want, who I am, where I'm going, that means that I have not completed, yeah, what is needed here. Yeah, self-reflection, self-inquiry, experimenting, trying things out, looking at and reviewing the consequences and the truths that arrived to me in my early 20s when I am fully self-responsible. And yes, Andrea, you're absolutely right. Yeah, when somebody gets stuck in their teenagehood, they do not want to look inward. They do not want to take responsibility. They feel like victims. Yeah. And it's, of course, Janet, that can then propagate. Yeah? So if someone actually gets stuck in teenagehood and never enters any of these, well, then all this, what is true to me, how do I express it, what is my true vision, what is my purpose, stays a mystery for that person. That person cannot enter into these higher levels of perception. It cannot feel that, cannot understand that about themselves or the world for that matter. So what am I actually saying here? I am
Jona, I
trying,
think we're
yeah. Go. Sorry,
sorry,
go
and
ahead,
I
David.
stuck, yeah, we're all stuck in various stages of developmental stagnation, and that's what the self-healing journey is all about, is to cover all these parts.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, we're all stuck in various stages to varying degrees.
Yes, but we have to understand the interconnectedness of it all. Okay, so this is
Yes.
what you see here on the screen is like a roadmap. Okay, if you have issues with trust, for example, yeah, or if you have issues with your knees, you need to understand what that is a physical expression of and investigate that. That's why we have these organs, yeah, the physical organs and the spiritual organs in us, because they are the places, the centers in our human form that have to deal with that.
It's a good point, because I was just as you were speaking there, I was sweeping the floor and my lower back was hurting, and I'm thinking, oh my God. So that was as you were
Yeah,
talking.
yes, and we don't like that kind of reflection. We don't like these kind of conversations that I am bringing up here, especially in the spiritual community. Yeah, because most of the spiritual communities out there are extremely immature and sending you to the wrong exits. Because they're all just talking about, oh, purpose and oh, quest and oh, ascension without completing these processes. This entire series here of evolutionary processes that we all have to go through on the physical, on the psychological, you know, with the emotional and mental, and on the spiritual and etheric level of our being, they have to happen. We call this initiation. And they all come with different kinds of questions and different kinds of difficulty levels, if you will, you know, like temptations and struggles and, you know, tasks. And it isn't until we can harmonize them all, harmonize, not perfect. I didn't say anything about perfection. I didn't say anything about succeeding. I was talking about healing. I was talking about completing. I was talking about unifying. Yeah, and yes, Jared, you're absolutely right. This is what the whole process of self-healing is all about. Self, because not only self-reflecting and self-awareness and, you know, sort of self-choosing, self-selecting, but also self-doing, self-healing. Yeah. Why? Because we can. Why can we? Because that's the gift that we have. That's the power we have. And if we do not learn how to wield that power, well, then we get stuck. Then we begin to, and first this happens on an inner level, and then in the course of the life, the physical life, it finds its physical manifestations in the denser levels, yeah, manifests for us in ways that you guys are all familiar with. Struggle, misery, problems, issues. Not to say that, you know, the goal is to not have any issues. That is hardly possible, because as soon as we enter, you know, like say a process of healing, and you start that process and you actually begin to heal, all right, you are now just, you know, basically jumping into the next octave of the same thing, you know, and have to learn the next level. So there always will be a struggle for as long as you are in this physical form. The struggle can be perceived on many different levels, on the physical, on the emotional, mental, spiritual, or energetic. But if you are becoming able to perceive it on the energetic before it manifests into your relationships, before it manifests into your way of believing and thinking, before it manifests in your way of feeling about yourself, and then fundamentally in your physical body, you can stop that and reverse that. So the power of self-healing, guys, is the reversal, which is nothing but the transmutation of pain and misery into a higher level, into a higher vibratory level, as we call this. It's a bit abstract when you say it that way, but that's fundamentally what that is. Yeah, so we can define healing as the process of transmuting something from a lower into a higher vibratory state on all levels of our being. And here we are again. The question is the strategy that we use. Now we can, you know, choose, and we will, and we did at certain stages of our development, we will choose different kinds of tools. Now we'll choose, you know, maybe physical tools who may want to master our physical sensations. Yeah, so some people have to deal with the sensualities of the body, yeah, the temptations of sex and of food, and, you know, the dopamine and serotonin and so forth. Yeah, which is, you know, part of the expressions of our lower self. It comes with this sensational, yeah, the the sensational phenomena of having a physical body, yeah, being able to experience pleasure. And as most of you know, this needs to be wielded. You need to learn how to wield that. Obviously, we cannot just live our life at eating as many cookies as we want to, because that wouldn't be good for us, for our physical body. Yeah, so we have to learn that. So we first learn how to deal with the sensual aspect of our physical body, and then we have to learn how to deal with our emotions, you know, and that it's not just all about our emotions, that there's other people too. Somebody here mentioned empathy. You know, we begin to learn on these higher levels that, you know, other people have the right to feel what they are feeling, and that everything we say, everything we do, you know, actually affects others, and therefore, You know, we have to master, you know, the mutuality of coexisting and evolving together, you know, and learn that the higher expressions are in, you know, the collaborating and the sharing and the inspiring one another and learning from another, rather than taken away from one another and you know, just following concepts of self-gain. And then at even higher levels of that, yeah, we'll learn that a certain level of selflessness, you know, allows us to, you know, to shed all these aspects of our ego, yeah, that pull us into our own darkness, into our own shadow, and all these aspects at this point that we've already discovered, yeah, into a higher form, into, you know, the ability, yeah, to do something and to care for something outside of oneself, yeah, for the higher, for the greater good of all. Don't get me wrong here, neither of these stages come without struggle. Yeah, so there is struggle on each of these. I don't really want to call them levels, because that pulls our ego into this linear thinking of, you know, like a ladder or steps or something. They were revolving, those are cycles. So the Sacred Self-Healing Program is not designed to be done once. The Sacred Self-Healing Program is designed to do over and over and over again in each of these different developmental stages, because you will recognize that there's other higher expressions and therefore also higher levels of harmonization that occur, you know, once you transcend, once you heal the lower. And then there's higher levels of initiation that can only be entered when you've completed a certain number of these processes. Because if you haven't, then many of these concepts that you will want to understand, you know, from the higher spiritual perspective, yeah, many of these esoteric and spiritual concepts will not be understood. In fact, they will be misunderstood and misused. So many of us enter spirituality from a perspective or from a situation, yeah, of extreme misery and desperation, of tremendous pain, where there is nothing left but the spiritual. There's nothing left but the spiritual impulse inside of you that you can still feel, you know, if your heart is broken, if you lost all your money, or, you know, if everything went down the drainer, you know, you can still feel this spiritual being in you, yeah, whether you contextualize it as the divine or God or Jesus or Christ consciousness or light or I, you know, is irrelevant at this point. I think you guys all know this. And, you know, how we enter the spiritual, the immaterial part of our being, the material understanding of our inner being, that is, you know, then first and foremost, the path that we are on. And the first part that comes up for us when it comes to using those spiritual tools and concepts is, you know, the escapism. We want to make ourselves feel better. We simply want our pleasure back. We don't want any pain. So many of us enter spirituality and you know, the consequential healing topics, yeah, in spirituality from a point of wanting to get rid of the pain. That's why a lot of people, you know, start with clearings and start with trying to get rid of stuff. Yeah, and that's understandable, but it often leads to misusing spirituality to just you know, basically reinstate or reconfirm the person's own delusions. Yeah, for example, that life should be different, that it should be pain-free, that it should be all just pleasure. or that it should all be just kumbaya, and that we should all hold hands and be happy together without having to do anything for it. You will find a lot of these ideas in those transfigured versions of spirituality, such as New Age, because there's really low motivation here to getting out of pain or out of fear is being used to promise you the escape from that. And one of the ways how you can actually tell if a spiritual teaching or like a teacher or a school is actually leading you to at least hear the level of truth, is if those darker aspects of our I and our lower developed aspects in us, such as shadow and anger and jealousy and all that, are actually discussed and worked with. If they're not worked with, you are clearly on the way to the wrong exit. And the wrong exit means that you're not evolving. So what happens when you're not evolving? When you're not evolving, you're not just coming to a standstill. Because there's a bigger evolution that takes place with or without you. Okay, and if you're not within that sphere of that bigger evolution, if you exit that, okay, then you are in fact devolving. You are exiting the sphere of this syntropic, oval cosmic evolution that we are in. And now this doesn't happen, immediately. So that happens when a person, and this is something that we'll discuss in the third part of the nature of darkness. This happens when a person rejects self-responsibility, rejects the power of the I am in them, does not want to step into that individuated soul self. In fact, when that person rejects the fundamental, absolute truth of him or herself being a spirit being that is having a physical experience, so rejects their own soul. This is the highest level of darkness that we are experiencing as humans on this earth, in this earth plane here, and it is here now. We are now observing this phenomenon. That's why we cannot have these kind of conversations without understanding the nature of darkness. And we can also not have these conversations about the body without the alien discussion. Why? Because the alien discussion that is in our societies, in our world right now, come up with another transfiguration of basic universal cosmic truths. And those have to do with the origin of the human. So if you, and we know this from politics and history, if you delude a person's understanding of their own origin, their own history, you are messing with their identity. And you are basically taking parts of that identity away. In fact, that has been done systematically for hundreds of years, under the flag of slavery, under the flag of, controlling conquered population, parts of the population, and so forth. So I'm not making this up. This is all, happening all the time. That the language, the culture, the rites, the ceremonies, the traditions, and even the history of entire, tribes or nations is being eradicated by the victors. And not just the victors, it has been used, you know, in the process of separating people and getting people to conquer one another, yeah, to kill each other. Thousands of years, guys. It's the easiest way to steer humans into self-destruct. If you confuse or delude them about their own identity, who they truly are. And again, here now you can, you know, come to your own conclusions as to which forces would be interested in that. Those are the forces that want to hinder the human race or the human form to evolve, or, and this is something that we then discover in the third part of our alien discussion, want to inject themselves into this life sphere that we are experiencing here. Yeah, to up themselves. Why do they need to up themselves? Because they're on a lower developmental or lower evolutionary path. Okay, so with this self-responsibility, with this power to choose, with this power to individuate, also comes responsibility. In other words, with us as humans, yeah, as human collective, gaining the power of consciousness, we also received, you know, the power of choosing. And the power of choosing means that there is a duality that presents in front of us, which it does here in this density. It's always the pressure of density that creates duality, all right? Which means that we can also err. We can also now choose the wrong things. That's freedom. Freedom means you have the right to choose the wrong things, or not so good for you, or devolving for you. You have the right to do that. That was given to you. In other words, with higher evolutionary states, with higher levels of consciousness, you also have more to lose. With higher levels of consciousness, you also have more to lose. And so the necessity to learn how to discern truth, how to harmonize all these fragmented parts in us, becomes greater and greater the more you evolve, the more you grow into your adult human form, including the spiritual, the etheric, the astral, the emotional, and intellectual bodies. Because only the harmonized self, the unified self, can complete this human form training program, if you will, and evolve beyond it. So this is then where we have to ask questions about karma and, you know, how this all plays out, how this all presents in our lives. And I want to, we have to kind of stop here with part one, yeah, of this contemplation, because you can see that we are entering a very high level of complexity in this discussion. And I want to, I hope that you guys have lots of questions, yeah, in or for our part two.
It's interesting, Jona, because in the kind of New Age movement, you know, there's a lot of, you know, concepts around, there's a lack of, less responsibility is the higher consciousness you get. So, you know, which again is taking people to the wrong exit, because when you think about the more consciousness you have, clearly the more responsibility you have with that consciousness.
So, and let me actually formulate a question with what you just said, with the statement that you just said. What is the problem with just, you know, sort of following, you know, the personal satisfaction and the escapism, yeah, that is offered through New Age, where it basically says, oh, just go with the flow, just channel things, and you know, don't resist, and just, you know, you know, everything's gonna be fine. What is the problem with that? The problem with that
It
is that
makes
it
people
cultivates. Yeah, sorry.
apathy.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, a question, it would cultivate like people being apathetic and not taking responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. But then we haven't investigated this yet. We have the other extreme as well, and that is the materialization, the intellectualization, the mentalization of those spiritual concepts, which is the other extreme. Yeah, where we get caught in righteousness and, you know, and laws and this and that, and, you know, all the spiritual masters, and you know, all the spiritual hierarchies, and all the history of the cosmos, and, you know, all these things, and we become, you know, experts in knowing all the different yoga states and all the different, you know, words, you know, Sanskrit words, and we are like experts in all of that, but we haven't experienced any of it. Like the examples that I made in the beginning about parenthood, or about, you know, relationships, or cooking for that matter. Any of these life skills, if you will, require a certain level of initiation, a certain level of structure. All right, we have to learn things along with it. We have to master them so that we understand the framework within which that operates. So on one hand, we have the channelers and the people who say, oh, you should just go with the flow and everything is fine, and da da da. And again, I've said this on many occasions, there's some fundamental spiritual truths woven in there, 5% perhaps, that are true. And then the you know, like the ways, or the pathways, you know, the roadmap that, you know, these profanities of spiritual truths are showing are all leading people into apathy. And then you have the other extreme, where it's all just about studying and intellectual mastery and knowing everything about this, and wanting to do degrees and things such as spirituality, without the internalization and without the actual processing and integrating of what all these things mean. And the good thing is, you know, just like how life has a way, that's why some call it the divine comedy, you know, you can't really enter, yeah, higher states if you have not mastered the lower states. It will just not happen for you. But if you try to use tools, you know, that are fundamentally true here, when you're on a level, you know, of your heart consciousness, and actually your entire life is cultivated that way. Yeah, you've you know, disciplined, and you've fostered all these things that are needed in life to be in a state of abundance, to be in a state of love, okay, and healing and free self-expression. Yeah, they're true there, but they're completely untrue down here. So if you're in a state of pain, Yeah, because, you know, let me just be very visceral here, because your boyfriend beats you up every day. Any of these tools up here, they're not going to help you. You have to address the problem where it arises. What would you recommend to someone who has issues in relationships and gets beat up by their boyfriend every day? What do they need to do in order to evolve out of that? Who dares to answer that question?
You realize when you've had enough
Simple.
of.
Yeah. Get away.
Mhm.
Leave that. That is not a good choice. You know?
Yeah, and like you were saying before, it's until we have we can read everything and look at videos or whatever till we're blue in the face, but unless we're having a relationship of a direct experience and actually experiencing it ourselves, then reading something can sound good to our mind, but we still have to put it into action in our own life.
It's still an act of self-gain. It's still an ego action. You know, that's why we have these two extremes right now with, you know, this sort of spiritual ego, you know, and with this spiritual naivete. We have these two extremes, you know, where people, you know, are following a spiritual impulse, but then, you know, end up getting either attracted in wanting to avoid pain, yeah, escapism, yeah, the delusions of spirituality, namely the delusions that everything is just joy and love and healing, yeah, entering into healing processes such as, you know, transmissions or workshops or, you know, meditation, you know, in order to get relief from their pain, or the other extreme where it's a form of self-gain and self-centrism, you know, wanting to prove that they are better than others. Okay, yeah, so you have these two forms, and we have to understand that, you know, obviously we all uh, follow the spiritual impulse at different stages or different states in our life, and therefore we all have to go through these states. Yeah, in our study group last week we talked about, you know, these different subjective experiences in these different stages. All right, so there is no judgment in any of this. We just have to really understand this. Yeah, if I ask you know, like what state were you in when you entered spirituality, yeah, in your life? Yeah, maybe Julianne, you want to answer that to me without too many details. You know, and what was it that you were seeking to gain through, you know, evolving into or working with spirituality when you were 18?
Yeah, a deep sense of loss and powerlessness, and then wanting to understand, what is this for? What is the meaning of this? It was either my self-annihilation, possibly.
At that
It's
point,
sort of like when you said before.
you weren't trying to understand it yet. Sorry for answering for you now, Julianne. Sorry, because you may not remember that, you know, because now you want to understand it.
Yeah, right.
Now you do. Back then you didn't do that. What did you do? Remember? You just wanted to feel good. You just wanted to feel better. You wanted to feel like
It
a
was like you
belonging.
said earlier. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It was like you said earlier. I just wanted to
to
feel
escape.
better.
Yeah, you wanted to
Yeah.
escape the misery. Yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to answer for you. I just happened to know this about you because we have been working for so many years. And so, you know, it's just like me and just like possibly all of us here, you know, we entered spirituality out of some kind of necessity. Yeah, maybe with prior impulses, but we didn't follow those impulses until we arrived at a place of misery or desperation, and that's, you know, what spirituality is for. Okay, but we have to evolve within that process of spiritualizing ourselves. Yeah, and this process, and I would like to discuss this with you in part 2, has to do with, on one hand, learning the anatomy, learning the framework, learning the structure, and also the disciplines of that. Yeah, which is sort of the masculine part of healing. And on the other hand, the experiencing, internalizing, and enlivening and ennobling those kind of concepts through, you know, the inner experience of your higher self, which is the more feminine and the more healing part of the spiritual journey, and also the initiation process. So we are looking at 3 components that are needed for us to evolve, yeah, for us to complete these different spheres of metamorphosis. And that is, first, we need to see the structure. We need to understand the framework within which we're operating. Then we need to gain a certain level of self-mastery through discipline, and we have to understand it. Yeah, we have to understand what comes first. Yeah, so those are things such as, you know, nutrition, obviously. Those are things such as mastering our thinking, mastering our emoting, mastering our choices, yeah, our needs, our wants, our will. Our entire series here this year and 2022 was dedicated to self-mastery, guys. This is a highly complex process. Without those disciplines, we don't need to talk about supplements or exercise, because you haven't really understood yet why and what and how. Needless to say that we all are individuals, which means that, you know, the ultimate truth of what is good for you can only be felt by you. But you have to have a map first that shows you different options. If all you know is that the only way to nurture yourself physically, or to nourish yourself, is through frozen meals from the grocery store, if that's all you know, well, then, you know, you don't need to feel bad about this, because then you have been, you know, put into a place karmically where your choices were limited. And then your job is to augment, to increase your perception, so that you can actually see that there are much more choices and many more choices out there. Yeah, that there's also something like fruits and vegetables and, you know, other things. But this is something that first needs to be covered. What kind of options do I think I have? Yeah, if all we believe is, you know, that if we have a certain ailment, we need to take a certain medication for it, then, you know, I can talk about self-healing all day long. It's not going to help you, because you're not recognizing that you have other choices.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Jona, it's like the easiest option at that moment in time, which might later on then evolve into something else. But like you said, it's where, when I was 18, where I was at, something that looked slightly better than where I was at was an option at that time.
Yes, and that is the process of healing. It's an entire process, guys, because every single time you begin to see more options and you choose even just a slightly higher vibratory option, you are healing, you are transcending something. So yes, when you are in a state of self-damnation, yeah, God has forsaken me, I'm cursed, I'm damned, I don't deserve love, I don't deserve life. Okay, yeah, then experiencing physical pain can be experienced as quite healing and bringing back a feeling of aliveness. And when you're in a state of depression, all right, thinking about, the future, no matter how scary the future looks to you, but thinking of the future is experienced as healing. It will, if it comes to a standstill, yeah, and does not evolve high enough, it will end up, in a place of anxiety where, the future looks like doom and gloom and fearful. It is, however, a leveling up. From depression into anxiety is a healing process. And likewise, getting so fed up with all your misery and all your struggles, yeah, and tuning into your anger and your disdain is also experienced as healing when you come from a place of depression and anxiety, of course, from a place of victimhood, because now you are mobilizing new options, new energies. Yeah? The rebellious teenager, you standing up, you're saying, F you, I'm not doing that. That is progress. Seen, yeah, relative, seen from the perspective of a depressive state or an anxious state. And likewise, learning how to pay your bills and learning how to control your life in a way that, you can operate and feel that you master at least some, like say the physical aspects of your life, yeah, where you have a certain level of control, is perceived as very healing when you come from an anxious state or a depressed state. But it still is, not fully in truth, because if you have to control your environment, if you have to control people in your life, if you have to, become controlling, then you will not really be able to see new options, new opportunities. You will not be open to experimenting and finding higher vibratory expressions. So each of these states, relative, seen from relative where you were before, is experienced as healing and is healing, but comes with a limitation until you cross the threshold of truth. And here now you begin to have the option to discern. It may still take you till here that you can master discernment, but all these stages need to be completed. You need to go through all of them. Is
and I
there
know
some?
for myself,
Yeah.
there's been several times in my life where I've actually I've been shown a new way, a new level of awareness, and a new level, I'd say a new frequency, for example, like a higher vibratory state that I could move into, but I've consciously chosen, no, I'm not ready, like actually said to myself, no, I'm not ready for that. And I've kind of made myself stay there. Before I was ready to move on. Like, looking back on it now, I kind of wish that I had made different choices. But does that make
Yeah, that
sense?
could.
Like, I'd been shown that.
Yeah, so I mean that has to do with perception and the ability to look into these spiritual realms as we evolve. Also, our perception evolves. Okay, but just because we can see it doesn't mean that it's us. Okay,
Yeah.
or that we have the ability to hold that. All right, so I was just going to say, is something like a spontaneous healing or spontaneous, sort of upping of our vibratory rate, is that possible? Yes, it is. And in those states, this is the purpose of meditations and energy sessions and transmissions and so forth, yeah, because there you actually train to hold your energy in those states. Okay, yeah, you foster that, you cultivate that, so that your body and your emotions and your thoughts and your etheric is slowly becoming able, yeah, to operate within those states. Because if you're not used to that, yeah, if you're not used to the state of abundance, because you still have some unconscious beliefs, you know, that everything is scarce, and that love, you know, is divided, and that you know, you have to separate yourself, see yourself as separate. The knowledge that those states exist doesn't actually help you. In fact, that's the part of the New Age deception, namely, you know, it's not that hard to catapult a person into that delusion, all right, by telling them all about it, yeah, and then calling it a channeling, yeah, and painting a picture, projecting those kind of states, all right, that allow you to mentally, yeah, cognitively tune yourself into such states. And even if you have a developed perception that allows you to, you know, to peek into them, doesn't mean that you could be there. It is, however, and this is important, Jared, for you to understand, that the moment you can perceive it, you can also achieve it. But it doesn't mean you're there. Does this make sense? If you can perceive it, you can achieve it.
Yeah, totally, because you wouldn't be able to achieve it if you couldn't perceive it.
No, the other way around. You couldn't perceive it if you
So,
weren't theoretically capable of that. But
yes,
whether or not you can actually be there and operate from that level, that depends on your level of mastery.
yeah, and I was nowhere near that point to be able to,
Right.
just because I couldn't look, it was like, no, I can't. There's no way I would be able to hold that state.
So with this perception also came the truth that you're not there yet.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That is not a choice. That is
Yeah.
literally sort of, those are safety bolts. Because
Yeah.
what would
Reflect.
happen to a person, and we can watch this, it happens in our world right now, that believes that they're there? What happens to all these people that work with the law of attraction and honestly think that they have the vibratory capacity, okay, to live life in abundance, while they're believing that the way into abundance is to have other people work for them? When you're in those higher vibratory states, these kinds of truths come to you in a heartbeat, spontaneously. You recognize immediately when something isn't true. When somebody tries to apply the law of attraction and you know, the things that come with this, the activities and so forth, at, you know, at a state of desperation, say at a state of depression, not being able to pay bills and not feeling that they can, you know, fully master their survival, okay, what will happen is that it will actually catapult them further down. It will make them feel like they're damned. It will make them feel, oh, abundance is out there, I can feel it, I know I can have it too, but it's not for me, only others can have it, I'm not good enough. You can see this in New Age all over the place. I'm not good enough. And why do so many people end up in that place? Because of the way these spiritual untruths are being presented to them. Oh, you are divine, you are the light, all you got to do is step into this and trust and da, da, da. There's some truth in that, but that does not apply when you enter from these lower states. When you enter from these lower states, these higher truths are actually sending you to the wrong exit. They are deceiving you into devolving instead of evolving. So let's leave this here. This is a very profound statement that I'm making here, and I really want this to reverberate within you. Not in the sense of questioning everything, but in the sense of self-reflection. And perhaps, yeah, and this is my goal, yeah, to trigger in you the self-honesty, yeah, that is needed to even get here, okay? Yeah, to get to truth and to say, yes, that is me. A part of me, and this is then fundamentally how you will end up seeing it, a part of me just wants to arrive here, just wants to have joy, yeah, just wants to be inspired and not deal with the lower aspects of life. And when you can arrive at that truth, then you know what to do, because then you actually understand yourself in a higher way. You understand now what your temptation is, what your ego is trying to do, yeah, and what your susceptibilities are, yeah, and what does not work for you, and what you have to look at instead. It's always what we can't see, guys. It's always the shroud, the blind spots. And that said, you don't need to be afraid of the blind spots, because just like how Jared demonstrated, the moment that you can perceive it, yeah, that's literally half the job. The second part of the job is, you know, or the moment you can perceive it is when you're already on the path of healing and integrating, and when you then can accept it, okay? Not as in like, oh, I guess that's where I'm at, but as in, okay, no wonder I could not understand this yesterday. No wonder I could not feel this yesterday, because the belief system, yeah, the framework that I was using was the wrong framework. You realize, yeah, just like how I had to realize in other areas of my life, that if you try to cut tomatoes with a dull knife, it's going to get messy. Huh? Those profound and simple truths are often the most catalytic spiritual experiences in our lives. You know, for example, when you realize that, yes, you know, you had all these circumstances and all these things that you know, shaped you in your childhood, that contributed to certain, you know, conditions in you, yeah, but these are also the conditions that have led you to investigate, you know, the deeper truths within yourself, and ultimately then became the catalyst for your healing and your spiritual evolving process. That's what accepting is. Accepting is like, oh, I see now what this was for. I understand now why I have to go through that. And in fact, if I had the power to turn the time back, I would not change a thing. Because I realized that without this pain, without my errors, without my naivete, I would have not arrived at a place where I can actually now discern this. And this is the level of awareness that we have to gain in order to just enter the conversation about the body. To just enter that conversation. And then we need to learn about, you know, what the purpose of this body and the physical experience truly is, and what the deeper spiritual truths are, all right, that allow for all of this physical creation to occur and to further evolve. So this is the level on which we're going to have this discussion, and I'm looking forward to this. In part 2, we will also have, parallel to that, the discussion about the nature of darkness part 3, which is the third force, the third, of the main dark forces that we're dealing with nowadays, about that. And then we also parallel having the discussion about aliens and all these space alien religions, and what the spiritual paradigm that is behind that actually is, and why that is, and how to discern that as well. One last thing, the next announced Sacred Self-Healing Workshop next week on Monday, I think that is, has to be at 9 p.m. and cannot be at 1 p.m. So sorry for you guys in Europe if you're planning on being there live. This is not possible for me. I have a new duty that I have to do on Mondays around this time, so I will not be able to do that on Monday at 1 p.m. It has to be at 9 p.m. So you will receive the email notification for that. So thank you guys very much for sharing and for being here. All right, thank you for contributing, for asking questions, and for going with me. This is a workshop. This is not a lecture. This is something that we work through together. So yes, I'm very, very happy for each and every one of you contributing here live or with questions that you submit, either before or during the webinar, so that we can, by illuminating these questions, dive into the deeper aspects that are behind that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jona.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.